precise altcoin and Bitcoin zones? What can we expect around the all-time high, ATH? Will we break through it and set a strong new peak, or will it rather be a trap? Valuations of ETH, Solana, Chainlink, Cardano, Ondo, Sonic, and many, many others with precise entry and exit zones, as well as exact no-trade zones, areas you should be aware of right now. A chart-focused episode packed with a lot of information and my own levels marked on my charts. So, make yourselves comfortable. Let's get started. So, my dear viewers, let's maybe begin with Bitcoin dominance. The dominance continues to rise in a rather amusing little uptrend because the moves are very small, yet over time we keep going up. At this moment, we are breaking above the main golden pocket, which could mean a run towards 72%, which would probably give us an all-time high, though whether it's the ATH we expect, or perhaps a bit lower, remains to be seen. My dear friends, let's take a look at what's happening here, because if we turn on the volume and switch to the daily interval, we can clearly see, and maybe I'll switch to another chart here, we can clearly see that we are indeed aiming to close above the all-time high. At this point, of course, after last night's pump, or rather this morning's pump, I've given up on shorts, on trying to catch this level. Shorts for me are just a way to hedge my spot position. I'm not opening any longs because I already have spot. I don't see any point right now with such weak confirmation, basically at the top, so mentally I just couldn't bring myself to open longs at the peak. I simply don't open them. At this moment, I'm also taking a break from shorts until we see what happens around $110,000. Why? Because I believe, and this is something worth paying attention to. At this point, after taking that very important liquidity, technically we haven't really taken that zone from the last swing high, from the last major swing high, actually. However, liquidity has been taken from these areas, so technically, theoretically, we could be breaking out to a strong new all-time high from here. Additionally, we have a very strong upward trend because with every bullish impulse, we see quite a large volume. You can see the green candles. This means that volume is appearing, which is a good sign, a bullish sign for making an attack, or rather for breaking through that all-time high. However, of course, there are some new pieces of news coming out, such as JP Morgan supposedly wanting to offer the purchase of Bitcoin ETFs at their bank, even though the CEO of JP Morgan was a total opponent. Suddenly it seems like dollar signs lit up in his eyes and he simply changed his mind. However, getting back to the chart, I see a possible move towards this first zone between 131 and 1272, meaning we have this area between 115,500 and 118,700, and that's currently my first zone where I might possibly try to take another small short position. Why am I so persistent in taking these short positions all the time? It's not that I want to bet against the market, because that's not how it should be done, and trading against the market usually ends badly. First of all, my short positions carry a maximum risk of 0.5% on the stop loss relative to my deposit, or even as little as 0.25%. So my risk on these shorts is set between 0.25% and 0.5%, which gives me a very good risk to reward ratio. That's because even if such a situation occurs, I still make a profit on my spot position. At this point, I don't open short positions larger than my spot position. In fact, I open short positions that are half the size of my spot position so that even if I hit 3, 4, 5, or 6 stop losses, the risk isn't that high, and if Bitcoin goes up, the profit from the spot position compensates for the losses from those stop losses, and actually, I end up earning a bit more on top of that. This is exactly what money management is, a good mathematical calculation of how to do it. How many stop losses can I afford? Of course, I've also determined that for myself somewhere, and I'll keep doing it up to a certain point. After that, I'll stop and simply collect all my profits from the spot position. However, for now, honestly, listen, my dear friends, what we've all been waiting for might actually happen. A rally to the all-time high at 118,000. Of course, the maximum range at this moment is 126,000. We're not talking about that. We'll see what our momentum looks like here. We also need to note that on the weekly chart, we still have room. We still have room before reaching the overbought zone. That is, before being overvalued on the oscillator compared to what the market is pricing in. So if we end up above that level again, it means that the price of Bitcoin is higher than what the market currently wants to value it at, and how it perceives it, to put it simply. Will any divergences form here? We already have divergences, so we definitely need to be cautious about that. Additionally, at this moment, these slight increases are being pushed here without volume. so either something similar will happen and we'll get a strong impulse with volume, because here we have a sell wall, so without significant volume, we simply won't break through it and reach the designated zone, or we'll stall somewhere and just start to fall. That's why I want to catch this move, but of course if it doesn't work out, then so be it. I'm not going to force it. So for now, as far as Bitcoin is concerned, congratulations to the spot traders who are still holding their positions. Congratulations as well to those who have taken positions on the futures markets. At this moment, for me, it's a no-trade zone. I'm observing and watching how the price will behave at our major swing high ATH and whether we'll get a bull trap or just a push-up into these zones we've marked out. Meanwhile, Total 3 is in a very good situation because despite the rise in Bitcoin dominance and the increase in Bitcoin's price, altcoins are not dropping in terms of market cap, so the situation is quite positive. We're still holding above $840 billion. This is a good sign for us, a sign that some money might actually start flowing into altcoins soon. That's why I still haven't sold my altcoin spot holdings yet, unlike Ethereum and Bitcoin, which I've already sold. I sold 10-15% of my Bitcoin, almost all of it. I think I have about 15 to 20% left, so not that much anymore. At the moment, though, the Total 3 looks very good. We should approach this optimistically because we also have a nice, noticeable upward trend. By the way, going back to Bitcoin for a second, we really haven't had any significant corrections at all when it comes to this strong upward trend. These corrections didn't even reach 38%, which is the 0.382 fib retracement. So here, if we do get a correction, you should expect a drop on the given swing, I think, down to some kind of golden pocket. So for example, if we assume that our high at this moment will reach, say, $118,000, then we could expect a drop even down to $91,000, which would be a correction of almost 62%. Of course, if it turns out that the trend is incredibly strong, then we shouldn't see a drop lower than $101,000. Besides, here at the 0.382 level, well, 0.382 is a bit speculative, but overall everything looks pretty good, so we'll see. Let's now move on to ETH against BTC, because here ETH is also gaining strength relative to BTC, and with the volume it looks pretty good. We should be satisfied with this because Ethereum is finally starting to perform well. This is a good sign for me in particular, since I bought ETH at an average price of $1,600. The first purchase was at $1,750, the second at $1,450, which at this point has given me an average purchase price of $1,600, and for now, I'm still holding on to it. I believe that Ethereum could get a nice pump here if the money flow starts moving out of Bitcoin, so only around $2,800 to $3,000 will I take a larger profit on Ether. I think it will be around 20, 30, maybe even 30% of my position from 1600, and of course we'll keep updating on Discord, and I'll also keep you informed on YouTube about what's happening with the portfolio, but it all looks positive. We'll see how this spectrum, from a longer-term perspective, gives Ethereum a boost here, because remember that every network upgrade doesn't work instantly, it doesn't cause immediate moves, you actually have to wait a bit for that. So Ethereum is definitely behaving well for us here so far. If we take a look at another Ethereum chart that I wanted to show you here, it's worth paying attention to this strong zone between 2883 and 1727.56. Of course, this is for people who are looking at lower time frames and want to play this out locally. As I said, at this moment, Bitcoin is at quite a strong peak, so from a short-term perspective, somewhat ignoring the sentiment and what's happening with Bitcoin, this zone here could be a good supply zone. I'm not saying to short it because I think it's quite a risky area, but it is a supply zone, so you might want to pay attention to what kind of reaction occurs here and perhaps take some modest profits from your swing trades. Additionally, you can see that just below this order block, because here we have a very strong order block around $2,850, we did get a reaction, but it was rather shallow. If we measure this swing with the Fibonacci tool, we got a 38% retracement, which is a sign that the trend is strong and the correction is shallow, meaning only 38% of the upward move was retraced, and then we had another run-up. So you really need to be careful with shorting here. I myself am holding off at the moment and watching what Bitcoin does. I intend to react immediately if we get any strange situations, especially news from around the world, because that's definitely something we need to pay close attention to. However, for now, we actually have confirmation of a strong upward trend, so as I said before, I'll be holding off on my shorts on Bitcoin and Ethereum for now, because there's simply no point in fighting the market by force. The previous shorts were, of course, stopped out. Not all of them, because some of the Bitcoin shorts, which were also played out on Discord during the live session, took profits of 20 or 30%, while the rest were stopped out at break-even. By the way, the last short I posted on my social media was closed around 30% of the position. The one I showed in the last episode, I think it was about 2.5 Bitcoins in the position, and the rest was stopped out at break even. So remember, protecting your capital is more important than making profits, especially in such a strong market. If you want to play a little bit against it, since we're at the top at an all-time high, you definitely need to keep your risk percentage very low. That's the first thing. Secondly, move to break even very quickly and take even small profits, because in such a strong trend, you can easily get caught off guard, so it's a shame to lose money on stop losses. It's better to take a smaller position, make a smaller profit, but actually secure it. Alright, but let's move on now. Maybe let's take a look at Solana, because with altcoins, the situation is a bit different. Altcoins won't surge as impulsively until Bitcoin shows its direction and makes it clear what it actually wants to do. I believe that altcoins will only start moving once there's a strong breakout above the ATH. I don't think that just touching or slightly breaking the ATH will make altcoins start popping off, because that still won't be a decisive move. Bitcoin needs to pause at a certain point, and the money from it has to be converted into altcoins, because that money doesn't just come out of nowhere. So when it comes to Solana, listen, the first supply zone was at the level of $186, and it was actually respected here. You could also check what percentage we had on this swing. Here we saw a drop of 50%, so the trend is a bit more flattened now, not as strong as before. So we'll really see what the situation will be here. Additionally, on the oscillators, we had an overbought zone right at this top. At this moment, we are still in an upward trend. We are not dropping below 0.5 on the Hurst channels, which means we must always go down to a maximum of 0.5 to remain in the continuation of the upward trend. So here, personally, if we see attempts to fill the fair value gap at $158, then this is definitely an area of interest for potential longs, if, as I said, we are considering a bullish scenario. Because here, my friends, as usual, we have to consider two scenarios: a bullish scenario for the entire market and a bearish scenario. If you are supporters of, or you lean more towards, the idea that we will see increases, which at this moment, looking at the chart from a lower time frame, I also believe, although from a higher time frame, I am a bit more skeptical, then you simply go long. If you think that something is off here, that something smells fishy, then you simply stay in the no trade zone, you don't take long positions, and you rather try to catch shorts, because it all depends on your approach. Why am I skeptical from the perspective of a higher time frame? Because, for example, on altcoins, even if we entered on the daily or even weekly chart, we still don't have confirmation that we want to move up and break through our last ATH. At this moment, a relatively interesting head and shoulders pattern is forming. Additionally, for us, in most altcoins it looks similar, and Solana is actually a good example. We got an overbalance, we got a change of character at this level, and an overbalance at this level. This is the first red flag indicating that we might see a trend reversal, and the trend will only become bearish once the previous significant highs are broken, which means at least $265. Only then can we say, okay, this is it, we're going up. This is an upward trend. Remember that the continuation of this upward trend won't happen like, okay, tomorrow we're making a new all-time high, but rather in a week, 2 weeks, a month, or 3 months, we'll reach a new all-time high. You need to look at all these movements from the perspective of a patient person, a patient trader, not someone who just rushes in head first. All right, it broke through, we're off, because tomorrow it's to the moon. That's not how it works, my dear friends. You have to wait weeks or even months for certain swings, for certain levels, so just approach this calmly. If we look at Link, the situation is quite similar. As I said, for most altcoins, the situation will be similar. At the moment, for example, Chainlink is not at all in my long interest zone yet, because right now we're still in this consolidation cluster here, and as for the recent moves, we're still here. We haven't broken the downward trend in any way. In other words, the upward trend. So for now, we really shouldn't expect any increases here. In fact, our important signal zone, I would even say, is $22 and above. At this point, of course, if someone managed to catch something here, then congratulations. These are really great spots, over 40% of the base move, so you really should be taking some profits here. If you have made 20, 30, 40% of the base move, then take your profits, because no one knows what will happen in the near future, so it's better to collect those gains. And sometimes I even recommend, like, for example, what I'll probably do with Ethereum. So if my average purchase price is around $1,600, then when it makes a 100% move, meaning we reach $3,200, my position will be reduced by 50%. So I'll take back the entire amount I spent on buying that Ethereum, and I'll have half of my Ethereum basically for free. So those can just sit there. I don't have to worry about them anymore. I can hold on to them for the next 5 years, even wait until the bear market. It won't sting or hurt me because I've already taken out my initial investment and the free Ethereum is just sitting in my account thanks to taking profit at a 100% base level. And I think most of you should approach this market the same way, especially if you're beginners. So here with Link, for now, I'm staying calm and not setting any alerts because at this point, there's really nothing to pay attention to. If we looked at this from a short-term interval, we still have support here and you can see it horizontally around $14.8, $14.5. So if we were to enter the change of character zone, you could try something, although in my opinion, if we start to break down, fortunately we've come back above for now, but if we start breaking down again, we could expect an overbalance around $12.5 to $13. Sonic. Listen, Sonic, there are some pretty interesting things happening with Sonic right now. Shout out to my friend Adrian from CST Pro. Listen, at the moment, there's a spot on Sonic that doesn't really interest me for trading. Why? Because we still don't have confirmation of a continuation of the upward trend. We had a nice wave pattern, it was looking good. We were getting volume during those upward impulses, but the last impulse came without volume, which could mean we stopped at the last swing high, which is currently key for us, and then we started to drop quite sharply, filling the lower levels and creating a sort of local overbalance. Of course, if we switch to the 7-minute chart, you can see it, because it was only on the 7-minute chart that we saw the break of this bottom. Of course, you could try to go long here in this zone between 46 and 47 cents. There's no problem if we assume that this overbalance will simply be filled, Bitcoin will go up, and Sonic's price will also break out quite strongly. Personally, I would rather look at my own entry if I were to make a decision to enter here. Of course, I'm also coming from a slightly different perspective because I already have a huge batch of Sonic, so I don't need to force myself to add more or go long. I'll just let it sit there. But if I had to force myself into a position, it would definitely be around 44 to 45 cents as the first legitimate fill of the fair value gap from the first bullish candle, which started this local, I would say, upward trend here, because globally we haven't broken through that. So in reality, we can't talk about any macro upward trend, because on the micro scale, it has only just appeared. And on the macro scale, it will only show up after we break through this level, meaning after we break through this peak, so after we break, let's say, 64 cents, after candles start closing above 64 cents, that's when we could say, okay, an actual upward trend has started here. It's worth considering taking positions or even adding to positions in such a strong trend. So my dear friends, when it comes to Cardano, we set up a trade on Cardano. The setup worked out very well at this point. For those who benefited from the setup, of course, the setup was done both on CST Pro and in the patron zone. So, what now? If someone is in this trade, then around 76 cents, they should already be taking at least 20% off their position and either move to break even or reduce their exposure by adjusting the stop loss or simply lower their risk and keep watching to see what happens next. At this moment, when it comes to Cardano, it's good that we've moved back above this charge, meaning the change of character around 73 cents. At this point, our target is 78 cents, where we should take the next take profit, and then the all-time high, closing above, breaking through this anchor VWAP, and aiming for a full 100% move from the entire extension, which is at the level of 87 cents. And profits should also be taken here. At this moment, when it comes to Cardano, it hasn't made a move similar to the previous ones I showed you earlier in the episode. So here we definitely penetrated this zone first, but only with this rake. At this point, if we don't break through this zone, we could see an overbalance down to zero. Well, not zero, but down to the level of 64 cents. So be careful. We have an important next VWAP here. If we drop below this point of control, then we might even go down to the value area low at 59 cents. But for now, as far as the upward trend is concerned, if we don't break through 77.5 cents, if we don't close candles above that level, then we can forget about any upward movement, so be very careful here, because we really don't have any meaningful breakout yet. Here, we clearly have a hold at the support zone around 57 cents, so we could even see a multi-month consolidation here, depending on what Bitcoin does, on what Bitcoin brings us. But looking ahead, if the price of Cardano reaches this red zone here, that is 119, 120, keep in mind that this is the main extremely strong liquidity zone, so just be careful with your positions here because anything can happen. The truth is that there was quite a strong attempt at a reclaim here. That's actually where we could say our consolidation started, so the liquidity here is so thick that a reaction is likely. Without volume, we simply won't break through this zone. And listen, what's happening with Ondo, because we haven't really looked at Ondo for a while, apart from Discord, of course. For now, it's still a no-trade zone. I don't see any opportunity for trading here. Only around 80 cents do we have a lot of confluence here. A very important area, a potential attempt to go long on Ondo, although in reality, the main liquidity, the main area to catch onto is here around 70 cents. Shorts are also an option, briefly speaking. We have a local zone around 1.07 where you could try your luck. We have several important confluences, the 0.05 VWAPE, main liquidity, and also the sell-side liquidity from this entire cluster, so it's definitely worth paying attention to. However, right now we are actually in a no-trade zone, so don't try to force trades on Ondo because it will just rip your hands off. And who needs that? It's better to watch, better to calmly plan out your trades. Here we can also see the entire scenario. It worked out very nicely. The Encore video app is holding incredibly well, so be careful. If someone caught it at 89 cents, congratulations, you did really well. Now, you should be taking your profits at the 1.382 extension, which is around 95 cents here, because at this moment, that's the most important level for Ondo when looking at it locally. And what about H-bar, my friends? Briefly, because there's really not much to dwell on or focus on with this coin. We can still see that the intermediate zone at 18 cents is quite a nice rebound area, the upper boundary of the parallel channel of the entire consolidation during the bear market. So here, we're holding this level quite nicely. You could have picked it up at the 0.5 level, I showed you this on the live sessions on Discord, or around the red zone. At this point, there's a very deep drop, because we've come down to the golden pocket. So the trend here isn't actually that strong, so be careful with your longs. Only the 0.5 level will be the decisive point for any decision on H-bar. So here, I would rather lean towards paying attention to the red zone, longs with a good risk to reward, because if we break through the liquidity below, I think we could even reach 10 cents on H-bar, so I strongly recommend being very cautious with this coin. Additionally, remember that right now the main moves are happening on Bitcoin, so don't expect anything extraordinary to be happening on the altcoins. It's worth catching local zones, it's worth playing the internal consolidations on the lower time frames, in other words, trading from range to range, because those are working out best right now. The moves aren't particularly impulsive. You can set a good risk-to-reward ratio, so it's definitely worth trading altcoins right now, but do it very cautiously, maybe with just 1% risk, because it's Bitcoin that will determine what altcoins do in the coming weeks and months. If we actually break out to a strong all-time high, surpass that bull trap at 118,000, which I'm hoping for, since I also hold spot positions, then altcoins could really get a big boost, because the overall economic business and even wartime situation in the world is also changing for the better. I think that this positive change won't happen quickly, but the news is definitely good. However, don't get too excited thinking that everything will change and improve within 2 weeks, because it won't. A few more bombs or some little planes might still fly by somewhere, so definitely keep in mind that along the way, with this bullish attitude toward the market and the so-called end of the war and so on, we could get an unexpected little flash crash. I'm not exactly counting on it, but I do consider it possible because if we have a strong upward trend and the situation is positive, aside from that small flash crash, it would be a great opportunity to catch some longs at good prices or add to your positions. Although I think we should be more inclined to start taking profits and maybe leave some moonbags even on all the coins you hold and then later swing trade them even on spot, especially at those irrational valuations after a flash crash. And my dear friends, what's going on with SUI? Well, there hasn't been any major breakout on SUI here. We've made a 113% move. For now, the trend has slowed down a bit. You can see that the impulses are a bit shorter. In fact, we could have gotten a nice ABC here, so theoretically we could even return to this level, and this is my buying zone, 61, 50%, which is around 3.072 to 77. Personally, I have my purchases, or rather my orders, on the futures market at the price of 280. Why? A very large fair value gap zone from this first impulse. Horizontal liquidity. There are a lot of confluences here that could indicate this will simply be a good place to try a long. I won't try it any earlier. Of course, if you want, you can try at 0.5. If you switch to a lower time frame, then here on this second fair value gap, you can attempt some internal, really short-term longs, but be careful because this fair value gap might turn out to be too weak and only actual demand, a real area of strong support, will be seen around 280. So here you have the most important zones, which I think are great to play. All right, that's all for today. Thank you all very much for watching today's episode. If you enjoyed it, give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss any future episodes. Thank you all so much for all the support you give me, especially through the ByBit affiliate program, and we'll talk again soon. Take care. See you later.